Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, June 27th, and the Yankees have won yet another series, taking the first two of a three-game set down in cheesesteak country. And it's nice to beat up on the Phillies after being on the wrong end of a sweep down in Tampa. That was tough, but there were good signs in those three games as well. Specifically, another good start from Sabathia, phenomenal bullpen work other than Chasen Shreve, and Giancarlo just playing out of his mind. We'll get to that too, but how about Severino last night? Yet another shutout. He drops his ERA down to 2.0, 26 first pitch strikes, and check out this stat. The guys with the most starts giving up one run or fewer since 2017. Number 2 on that list, Scherzer, Sale, and Verlander all tied with 22. Number 1, Luis Severino with 24. And I thought Stanton put it really well after the game last night. He said what makes Severino so dominant is simple. He has closer stuff, throwing upper 90s, 100 miles an hour for 100, 110 pitches. And last night he actually hit 101 on the radar gun. So we got ourselves an ace, my friends, and a damn good one, with a major league leading 12 wins. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well, or drop us a line, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked who you think has the best chance to develop into an ace, Domingo Germán or Jonathan Loaisiga, and I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about the Tampa Bay Rays and their approach of using relievers to start games. Also, he's the editor-in-chief of EliteSportsNY.com. Danny Small joins the show. You'll hear part 1 of that conversation, and we'll go through the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these players holds the Major League record for most extra base hits in a single season? Is it A, Lou Gehrig, B, Sammy Sosa, C, Barry Bonds, or D, Babe Ruth? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
So tonight should be interesting. Boone decided to give Sabathia some extra rest, which makes sense long term, and he's going to go with Luis Cessa on the hill tonight. This way, with the off day tomorrow, Sabathia gets 2 extra days of rest, and then gets to start in the series opener against Boston at the stadium on Friday night, followed by Gray, also on 2 extra days of rest, and then Severino on Sunday on normal rest. It's been a pretty tricky task handling this rotation with all the injuries. First to Montgomery, Sabathia was out for a while, Tanaka too, but Boone and Cashman have handled it really well, and the Yankees have weathered the storm as they continue to hold the best record in baseball. But Boston continues to hang around. The Yankees just 12 percentage points better, and more it seems like this is going to be settled head-to-head. The Red Sox have the horses, it seems, to stay in the mix for the duration. So these remaining series between the Yankees and the Red Sox, and there's 4 more, including the one this weekend, are going to be very, very intense because the team that comes out on top is going to get the division and likely home field throughout the playoffs. And the loser gets to play a wild card game, win or go home. So big stakes. And on that note, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at some of the individual performances this week and determine who stepped up and who did not. And the headliner of our good section must be the aforementioned Giancarlo Stanton, who's just been pummeling the ball the last week and change. Stanton in the last 10 games is hitting .436, slugging .846, and has 10 RBIs. And he had his best game of the season on Sunday in what was unfortunately a loss in Tampa, going 5 for 5 with a solo home run and 2 RBIs. So he's come a long way from his platinum sombrero days back in April, as I predicted back then. It was only a matter of time time. He's too talented. And this is exactly the point in the season when Tino Martinez, back in 96, broke out. That was his first season in New York as well, and he had a dreadful debut until about mid-June. So Giancarlo Stanton, believe it or not, now leads the team in hits with 79. And on top of those gaudy numbers, Stanton even flashed some leather in the field. During Friday's loss to the Rays, he made a fantastic leaping grab of a C.J. Cron drive, and that was with men on first and third with nobody out. And even though the guy on third scored, it prevented the runner on first from advancing, and then Sabathia induced a double play. So great job all around this week from Giancarlo Stanton. Also good, great in fact, has been Dellin Betances. In his last 14 games, 0 runs, 1 hit, and 24 strikeouts in 14 innings. Now, the first at-bat of his major league career was another story. That was on Monday in Philly, and it was just about the most ludicrous thing you've ever seen. 3-pitch strikeout. And after the game, when somebody asked Aaron Boone what his thoughts were on that at-bat, he said, quote, "What do I think? I think I'm in favor of this DH thing. That's what I think," unquote. Agreed. And I loved David Cone on Monday night in that same game. The Yankees made a double switch. And of course, that's the big talking point of those who want pitchers to hit, that this sort of strategy is what makes, pitchers hitting so great. So as Boone was talking to the umpire, Cone said in a voice dripping with sarcasm, "Look, the most exciting part of the game, a double switch. My heart rate's going up." Well done. Now, the position player who was removed during that double switch, headlines our bad section, and that is Greg Bird. Now, the guy who came in for him, Neil Walker, has been no better, but you can kind of explain that by how sparingly he's been used. But Bird, he's been in there every day, and it's just painful to watch at this point, hitting 186 now after about 100 plate appearances. Now, given the fact that he didn't have a spring training, I'd say maybe give him a little more time to snap out of it, but if this continues, then I think the Yankees owe it to themselves and the fans and Brandon Drury to give Drury some starts at first base, or maybe Tyler Austin again, just to give Bird a little real competition, because I don't want to beat a dead horse. I said this last week, but no more excuses for Greg Bird. Make or break season, put up or shut up. Now, our ugly section features a pitcher I've never liked, Chasen Shreve, who's been just abysmal this season. Sunday was sort of the perfect example. In the 12th inning, he comes in and one pitch, the game is over. Walk-off home run. Shreve in his last 10 outings has a 10.39 ERA, and that includes 3 home runs. He's been beyond awful. And by the way, during that ludicrous at-bat by Betances on Monday, I see Shreve yucking it up on the bench with Jonathan Holder, and I'm thinking, what is this guy laughing about? I mean, remember that scene in Moneyball where after a loss, Brad Pitt hears the A's kind of celebrating and dancing around in the clubhouse, and he goes in and he smashes the boombox with the bat, and there's dead silence, and he says, "That's what losing sounds like." I like that scene. I like it a lot. There should be a rule in Major League Baseball. If your ERA is over 10, you're not allowed to laugh in public. And given the plethora of really good arms in our bullpen, and I don't care if they're all righties, they're getting guys out, lefties and righties, I see no need for a situational lefty. And if that's the basis for Shreve's continuing employment by this team, I question it. I really do. I mean, if he can't get it together in his next few appearances, just get rid of him. The Yankees should either just designate him for assignment or decide he has a bad back or something and toss him on the DL. It's enough already with this guy. Enough. Now, our runner-up to the good section, and only a runner-up because he didn't get as much of a chance to play, is Clint Frazier, who, when I sang his praises last week, I said all this guy has done when called upon is produce. And that did not change in his last stint with the Yankees. Overall this season with the big club, Clint Frazier's hitting .350 with an on-base of .458. And he was absolutely robbed of a homer on Sunday due to a hanging speaker at that dopey Tropicana field. I hate that. If a fly ball bounces off the speaker, it's in play, and that was caught. But, I'm happy to report that Brian Cashman appears to be nudging Frazier onto his untouchables list. Here's what Cashman had to say about Frazier to Mike Mazzeo of the Daily News. Quote, "We'd like to hold on to him. I know he's someone that we're going to get asked a lot about, and so far we've been able to say no, but I'm a big Clint Frazier fan. He was a big piece of that Andrew Miller trade, and I think he's got some really good baseball ahead of him. He's going about his business perfectly right now. He's impacting us in a positive way and saying all the right things," unquote. So that's good news. Now, other top-notch performances, obviously Severino. Aaron Hicks continues to sizzle. Big leadoff home run last night and a phenomenal catch in center field. Aaron Hicks, and I said this on Twitter, is almost certainly the best defensive center fielder the Yankees have had in my lifetime. And I go back to the 70s. He's better than than Mickey Rivers. He's better than Ricky Henderson. He's better than Bernie, who I loved, but, Hicks has a much better arm. Certainly better than Johnny Damon. I mean, he's the real deal, guys. Big-time athlete, Aaron Hicks. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers by Danny Small, editor-in-chief of EliteSportsNY.com, which is a phenomenal site with tons of in-depth coverage of all the New York teams. Highly recommend it. And he blogs for the site as well. Danny, it's a pleasure having you with us today. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to be on. It's good to be talking Yankees and little bit of the other New York sports with you.
Now, before we get to current events, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with Elite Sports NY.
Well, I got involved, I want to say October-ish of last year. Started out doing some writing and basically just writing Knicks and Nets stuff. And then, I kind of grew a little bit and began writing a little more and more. And that's when I kind of started doing some baseball stuff, some Yankees, some Mets, a little football. And as time went on, I just kind of kept taking a little bit more, and eventually I became editor-in-chief where I'm at now.
So is it a full-time thing, or do you do other work as well?
I have other work that I do, freelancing type stuff. I've done some content marketing in the past, but I'm looking to, I want to get in the sports stuff full-time. So I'm doing that right now. But right now, Elite is a part-time thing, but we'll see where it goes from here.
So I'm a Yankees, Rangers, Knicks, Jets guy. So Danny, which New York teams do you root for? And secondly, do you find it hard to write about teams that you root for in terms of, staying objective?
Yeah, that's a really tough thing to get a handle on when you're such a big fan of a team for your whole life. And, I'm Knicks, Yankees, Jets, and Islanders. And I have a soft spot for the Mets a little bit because everyone in my family is a Mets fan. So, I don't necessarily root against them. But back to your point about, writing about a team that you're also a fan of, it can be difficult. I find myself having the easiest time doing it with the Knicks, just because for so long they've been so, bad and mediocre and stuff like that. But I'm not necessarily too negative, but at the same time, they don't let you get too over-the-top positive.
Yeah, well, being your age, in your 20s, you've never really seen any sustained success from the Knicks, right?
No. I was too young, really, to understand when, 99 and, those good 90s Knicks teams, because I'm 25, so I just pretty much started watching in those, 99, 2000, 2001s, with the Spreewells and the Van Gundy years. So really, as long as I've, been old enough to really know what's going on, I haven't seen any sustained success.
All right, we'll get into the Knicks later, but let's switch gears now and get to the Yankees. Obviously, a brutal weekend in Tampa. Yankees got swept by a team that's 3 games under 500. They lose Sanchez with a right groin injury. Considering the fact that the Yankees have gotten to 50 wins in mid-June, is this just a blip, do you think, or is there some legitimate concern, particularly with the Yankees' recent bad numbers hitting with runners in scoring position?
Yeah, I tend to think it's more of a blip in the radar. This was the first 3-game losing streak they've had all year long, which is incredible that they made it this long, without losing 3 in a row. So, the Sanchez injury is going to hurt. I know he hasn't played as well as he's capable of this year, but anytime you lose a guy like that in the lineup, it's going to hurt you. But for the Yankees, I just hope, Romine can kind of hold down the fort for a little bit. And then, a pitcher's coming sooner or later from, Cashman's going to do a deal for somebody. So I'm not too worried about the Yankees right now. The toughest thing is just, the Red Sox aren't going away, and it's going to be a dogfight with them to try and avoid that wild card. So, every game counts. I know that's a cliche, but when you're in such a tight race, you gotta take some of these series when you can.
Now, we did have some good news on Sunday. Masahiro Tanaka had his first bullpen session since going on the DL with 2 strained hamstrings, and he felt fine afterwards. He should throw a simulated game on Friday and then be back in action hopefully next week. But we've had some inconsistency on the staff from Domingo Germán, who stepped in for Montgomery and looks like an ace in one start and then gets shelled the next. And Sonny Gray has had his ups and downs downs as well. Do you think it's pretty much a done deal that Cashman goes out and trades for a starting pitcher before the deadline? And any thoughts, Danny, on who that pitcher might be?
I don't know if it's 100% done deal, but you have to have that feeling like Cashman's going to go out and do something. And the guys on the market, I know Madison Bumgarner was somebody that was getting a lot of talk. But I don't see the Giants trading him away because, they trade for McCutchen and Longoria. Sounds like they're going for it this year and they're going to give it a shot. Then some of the other guys, I don't know, Jay Happ, he might be an option, but it's always kind of tricky when you're trading within your own division. But I think, Cashman's going to kick the tires on some of these guys. But at the same time, if Tanaka can come back healthy and kind of, get away from the inconsistency that we've seen from him this year, Sonny Gray can continue to kind of figure things out. Maybe Cashman feels he doesn't need to make that trade, but I think when all is said and done, I think he's going to at least go out and try and get somebody to bolster this rotation.
Now, one Yankee who's done absolutely nothing since his return to the roster is Greg Bird. I think he's hitting 186. Now, on the one hand, I understand those that have been preaching patience. He never really had a spring training. But on the other hand, I'm sort of tired of hearing about his potential. I think it's time to produce. And in my opinion, this should be viewed as a make-or-break season for Bird. But what's your take, Danny? Do you think the apparent faith that the Yankees have in Greg Bird is justified? In other words, do we need to give him more than just this season to get it together before thinking about a change?
That's a really good question because, this is something, he's been injured for so many years and this is something, just have faith. He's going to come around. He's going to be the first baseman that we all think he's going to be. And you hope that he can get to that spot. But, he's struggling right now. I think, honestly, something like bringing up a guy like maybe Brandon Drury, if he can play a little first base, maybe someone who can kind of, bring a little competition. Maybe that gets Greg Bird going because, like you said, he's got all the talent in the world. The Yankees know this, but at a certain point, when you're not producing, at a certain point, you gotta make a change. You gotta figure something out. But, hopefully, like you said, no spring training. Hopefully, kind of can get his legs under him and start producing. And right now, especially, Yankees have a really good record. They're in first place. You can kind of get away with a guy not producing the way he should.
Now, the bullpen has been mostly excellent, with the notable exception of Chasen Shreve, who threw a single pitch in the 12th inning on Sunday in Tampa and gave up a walk-off home run to rookie first baseman Jake Bauers. His ERA is now over 5. Honestly, he's never been very good for the Yankees, and I think the only reason he has a job is because he's a lefty. So, Danny, is the lefty-righty thing overrated? Should this guy have a roster spot on that basis alone? Or do you think maybe the Yankees try to move him before the trading deadline?
I think the lefty-righty thing can be overrated at times. Like, I think, you have Chapman who's a lefty, but he's obviously never going to be your lefty specialist. And I think a lot of times teams just want that lefty just for that hypothetical scenario of, if two lefties are coming up in the 7th inning, that type of thing. But, the proof is in the pudding with Chasen Shreve. He's never been really all that special for the Yankees. In terms of trading him, I don't know if you could get much back for him. I think the best thing for him might be to just, send him down, let him work through some of these issues in the minors because, he really has never been very good for the Yankees, and he just always seems to be on the roster.
Okay, so before we move on to some of the other New York teams, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Danny, and just give us a few quick crystal ball predictions. First of all, do the Yankees take the division this year, or is it Boston?
I think the Yankees do take it. I think the lineup is so good. Hopefully, they can bring in another starter to bolster that rotation. Severino continues his excellent streak this year. And I think they end up edging out the Red Sox, who I think maybe they're, obviously they're playing really, really well, but I think the Yankees end up edging them out, which I think will in turn, the Red Sox will win the wild card game and we'll get to see, Yankees Red Sox playoffs. I think there's so little in between those two teams, but if crystal ball, I have to say Yankees might edge them out.
Okay. Does Gleyber Torres win AL Rookie of the Year?
I think that one I can say 100%. I think Gleyber's going to win Rookie of the Year because, he's come up. He's been so hot. and he has really shown no signs of slowing down. I mean, I'm sure, he's young, so he's going to have a slump here and there. But, he seems like he makes all the adjustments, and he really just seems to get better every at-bat, within the at-bat. And I think when Shohei Ohtani went down, I think that really kind of solidified his place as the lead guy in that.
Okay, final prediction. Now, if the season ended today, the National League division winners would be Atlanta, Milwaukee, and Arizona, 3 teams that basically no one had winning their division, and the wild card game would be the Cubs hosting the Phillies. Do you think it's one of those teams that makes it to the World Series this year, or does another team, like the Dodgers, for example, come out of the woodwork?
I wouldn't be shocked if the Dodgers kind of came out of the woodwork and made a playoff push, but everything so far this year hasn't really shown me that much. I mean, I think I would have to say a team like the Cubs right now, if I had to choose a team in the NL, because they have all the experience. Those guys know how to win in October. Madden is a pretty good manager, one of the better in the league. If I had to crystal ball prediction, I'd probably say the Cubs, just based on their past experience.
That's Danny Small, editor-in-chief of EliteSportsNY.com, and you can hear part 2 of that interview on the next episode of Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Who holds the Major League record for most extra base hits in a single season? The answer? D. Babe Ruth with 119 in 1921. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. Who do you think has a better chance of developing into an ace? Domingo Germán or Jonathan Loaisiga? And 71% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said Loaisiga, and 29% said Domingo Germán. And this question is relevant not just in terms of their respective long-term futures, but in the short term as well, because it looks like Tanaka will rejoin the roster next week. And so with Severino, Tanaka, Sabathia, Gray, all secure in their roles, one of these guys, Loaisiga or Germán, will be the odd man out. And look, there's a lot to like in both of them. Of course, Germán was dreadful in his last start in Tampa, but Loaisiga has a smaller sample size. I mean, just 3 major league starts. But with Germán, I wouldn't let that one bad start overshadow what he's been doing recently, because in his 3 starts before that, all quality starts, he had at least 9 strikeouts per game, okay, with a ton of swinging strikes. If he had the innings to qualify, he'd have the 4th best swinging strike rate in baseball, behind only Scherzer, Sale, and DeGrom. And he's got a full arsenal. I mean, fastball that hits 96, changeup, curve, all 3 generating swings and misses. So for me, I mean, long term, Germán is a guy who frankly shows more promise, more raw talent than Jordan Montgomery, the man he's replaced in the rotation up until now. But the poll is about Germán and Loaisiga. And this kid, Loaisiga, as I said last week, I like what I've seen very, very much. Cool as a cucumber, no matter what situation he's in. And he was just phenomenal on Monday night in Philadelphia. Pretty good hitting team, just 1 hit over 5 1/3 shutout innings, striking out 8. A little more limited in his repertoire than Germán, mostly fastball, slider, both good, but occasionally goes to that changeup as well. Now, the one downside with Loaisiga so far, surprisingly, because this was not a problem in Double-A, is walks. But again, given that that's not been a problem in the minors, I'm not too worried about it. In Double-A this year, he had 58 strikeouts and just 4 walks in 45 innings this year, which is unreal. So my answer to the poll, which will sound like a cop-out, but it's my honest answer, is that each of these guys has the talent and potential to develop into an ace. But in terms of the short-term decision of who stays up when Tanaka comes back, I guess I'd go with Germán, mostly because he's been able to go longer into games, and that'll keep our bullpen just a little more fresh. But honestly, I wouldn't be heartbroken either way. Bottom line, I see major upside in both these guys. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Ziad in Brooklyn. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think I am. I had a friend in college named Ziad who was from Lebanon. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter at BombersPodcast is the handle, or leave us a message at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Ziad writes, what is the reasoning behind the Tampa Tampa Bay Rays starting so many games with relievers? I don't get the advantage of doing this. That's a great question, Ziad. So the Rays announced in March that they'd be playing this season with a 4-man rotation and using the bullpen every 5th game. For example, Sunday's game against the Yankees, that was that brutal 12-inning loss. That was a quote-unquote bullpen day. So manager Kevin Cash started Matt Andres, who's actually been a starter and a reliever in his career. So Andres pitched 3 innings, and then you had 6 other relievers for Tampa since that game was so long. But what happened this season with the Rays was they had so many injuries to their starting rotation. I mean, first of all, to former Yankee Nathan Eovaldi, who's actually back now and pitching great, and then Chris Archer and Jake Faria are now on the DL as well. So they've actually had these so-called bullpen days much more frequently than every 5th game. In fact, there was a series in late May against Baltimore where the Rays, all 3 games were bullpen days, and that's a series that Tampa won. And many of these bullpen days have been started by Sergio Romo, who came up with the Giants in 2009 and had never had a major league start until this season with Tampa. That was on May 19th against the Angels when he pitched just the first inning and struck out the side. And then Romo actually started the very next day as well when he pitched 1 1/3 scoreless innings. So the Rays, Ziad, obviously are a small market team, and their pitching staff has been decimated leading into the season. They lost 2 of their best pitchers, Jake Odorizzi and Alex Cobb, to free agency, and they had Nathan Eovaldi on the shelf for basically 2 years after he had not 1 but 2 Tommy John surgeries. But Tampa lost another starter, Yanni Chirinos, with a flexor strain in his forearm. That's what Montgomery had, and is commonly a precursor to Tommy John surgery. So they basically had 2 options: fill all these holes in their rotation with prospects who basically weren't ready. The Tampa farm system is not deep, and their only pitcher who was close to ready, Brent Honeywell, just had Tommy John. Or they could do what they've been doing with some success, and that is using the major league talent they have in the bullpen for entire games. So of course they've taken some heat from traditionalists. How could they be doing this? They think they're so smart. If this was such a good idea, how come nobody tried it before? But it isn't really that hard to figure out if you look at the Rays as a team with very few options on the pitching front. And then if you think about, matchup advantages that this gives you early in games. Now, I think this matching up lefty pitchers and lefty hitters can be overstated at times as an advantage. If a reliever's hot, like Dellin Betances right now or Chapman, they're getting anybody out, lefty or righty. But Tampa can essentially do that kind of mixing and matching with the opposing team's lineups right out of the gate and not save it for late innings, which is an advantage. Obviously, teams are not going to pinch hit early in games. So if you think about it, this bullpen day approach is a hell of a lot better than throwing a young starter out there who might not be ready for the big leagues and saying sink or swim. And the Rays have not been awful this year. They're basically a 500 team and have won some games against some very good ball clubs, including the Yankees, Red Sox, Angels, and Astros. And the fact that this approach of starting relievers has been effective is sort of bolstered by this quote here from Zach Cozart. Cozart was one of the 3 Angels that struck out in that first Sergio Romo start. So Cozart said, quote, "I don't think it's good for baseball. It's definitely weird not knowing who you're going to face in your first couple of at-bats. It's like spring training. That's the best way I can describe it. I hope things don't go in this direction," unquote. So apparently, if you're Zach Cozart, what isn't good for you personally isn't good for baseball, right? I mean, if opposing hitters are against it, I'd say that's 2 thumbs up for the strategy. But a bunch of managers, including Aaron Boone actually, have praised what Kevin Cash is doing, with the caveat that Tampa's rotation is very banged up, and as I said, they don't have really a lot of options. I mean, the truth is, these days, starters don't go that far into games anyway. It's really 3 times through the lineup and goodbye. So if the bullpen is going to pitch a ton anyway, it makes sense to put guys like Romo and more veteran relievers up front to maximize their effectiveness, because across Major League Baseball, the most runs this season by far are scored in the first inning, and that's not just this season, that's normal. So again, Tampa is maximizing the effectiveness of their veteran relievers, and I don't see anything wrong with that, especially against teams like the Angels and the Astros, where the top of their lineup is totally right-handed hitters. I mean, the bottom line is managers have always called upon relief pitchers when they want fresh, effective arms against the opposition's toughest hitters in high-leverage situations. And to me, the first inning where the opposition's best hitters are guaranteed to hit why shouldn't that qualify as a high leverage situation? Just because it's early in a game? Because as I said, we have inflated run totals in the first inning, not just this season, but every other season as well. And the second inning, by the way, has the lowest run totals for the obvious reason that your best hitters are guaranteed not to bat unless you bat around. So in general, the second inning is where Kevin Cash has been using these younger, more unproven starters. And so as weird as it seems, I could definitely see this approach catching on with teams who are facing similar challenges to the Rays. And as much as the traditionalists always want everything to stay just like it is, the fact is the game is always changing. It's been evolving all along. I mean, the idea of a closer, for example, which every team uses now, is not that old. That term closer didn't even exist until the early 90s, and Tony La Russa was really the first manager to use a pitcher, Dennis Eckersley in that case, in that position exclusively back in the 80s. So rules are made to be broken, and if this bullpen day approach is effective, as it appears to be so far for Tampa, I think it's an exciting development. I think it could add a new dimension to not just managerial strategy, but organizational strategy moving forward, especially for small market teams. So this is definitely a development to keep an eye on moving forward. I think it's really interesting. But thanks, Ziad. Great question. And let me know if I pronounced your name right, okay? And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, find us on Spotify, follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.